Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Redefining Resilience, Infrastructure Development in the U.S. and Defense Tech. Today, we will hear from Global X research analysts, Tejas Dessai and Alec Lucas. The United States is currently experiencing an economic transformation fueled by significant government investment. This transformation extends to U.S. infrastructure development, promising unprecedented growth in areas such as construction and engineering. Simultaneously, the global geopolitical landscape is witnessing increased tensions, driving a surge in investment in defense technology. To address evolving security challenges, there is a group of companies at the forefront of innovation, creating exciting investment avenues for those who wish to participate in the evolution of national security. The Investments and Wealth Institute has accepted this webinar for 1 hour of CE credit towards the CIMA, CPWA, CIMC, and RMA certifications. It has also been approved for 1 CFP CE credit. During today's presentation, there will be 3 poll questions that will allow us to get your opinions on various topics. Should you have a question, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer it. Now to kick us off, here's Tejas Dessai.
Thank you, Patrick, and good afternoon, everyone. Warm welcome to each one of you through this webinar here today. My name is Tejas Dessai. I am one of the analysts here with the Global X thematic research team. Our topic for today is redefining resilience with infrastructure development in the US and defense technology. Folks, like Patrick mentioned, the United States is currently experiencing a very unique and generational economic transformation. For the past couple of years, we've been ramping up. We've seen significant ramp up in government investment activity. In fact, trillions of dollars of government money is being spent to supercharge local infrastructure across the country, right? Building roads, building bridges, building factories, housing, commercial establishments, etc. In large part, this is driven by several converging megatrends as well, right? We're seeing big strides being made in the EV industry, trying to boost EV production locally. We're seeing the reshoring of manufacturing back to domestic territory. At the same time, we're trying to reignite a semiconductor ecosystem here locally as well. So what all of this does is it's driving unprecedented growth in several economic segments, right? Construction, materials, engineering services, and more. At the same time, the global geopolitical landscape has shifted quite dramatically in the past few years. So the United States and its allies are preparing for a new future in terms of how a global defense looks like, right? The conflict in Ukraine was a turning point, I believe, for global security. And now we have a horrific crisis here unfolding in the Middle East as well. And while nobody wishes for more conflict, what we're seeing very clearly is a surge in investments in defense equipment and specifically defense technology. National security has to undergo this comprehensive transformation to prepare for what's to come. And together, along with U.S. infrastructure, we think that these two themes represent something that investors, again, must consider as they think about this new world order that we're going into in the near future. So moving through the slides here, again, my name is Tejas Dessai. I am a research analyst here at Global X, mostly focused on covering a broad suite of products focused on disruptive technology. So everything from cybersecurity to defense tech, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and more. I'm also joined today by my colleague, Alec Lucas. Alec is an infrastructure, EVs, and clean energy focused analyst here on our team. He's going to be walking us through the US infrastructure portion of the presentation today in the second half of this session here. Before we get into the meat of the content, a quick intro to Global X. Global X is primarily an ETF issuer. We're one of the largest issuers of thematic ETFs out there. We were founded in 2008 with a simple vision, which was to offer investors unexplored intelligent investment solutions. We have roughly $51 billion in assets today across all of our franchises and solutions worldwide. Close to 40 billion of that is in domestic US-based ETF strategies. We're primarily headquartered in New York City with offices in London, Madrid, Singapore, Brazil, all over the world. And we're part of the Mirae Asset Financial Group, which manages more than $500 billion in assets worldwide. Here's a quick look at our current AUM split. Again, we're primarily known for our thematic ETF suite. We have over 100 ETFs listed here within thematic, with roughly 38 unique strategies across technology, healthcare, US infrastructure, clean energy. Thematic is really what we're known for, but our income suite is also growing very rapidly as well. Currently has about $22 billion in assets and is very well positioned in the current environment that we're operating in. We also have a very robust commodities focused suite, as well as an international access suite, which is growing very fast as well. ETFs is primarily what we're known for, but outside of the traditional ETF structure, we also offer ETF-based model portfolios, as well as dedicated solutions on the institutional side with specific SMAs as well. Here's a quick look at our thematic ETF suite. Again, as you can see, it is really wide and comprehensive. We have close to about 38 unique strategies that target ideas from fintech to robotics and AI to autonomous vehicles, US infrastructure, defense tech, property technology, cybersecurity, cloud computing, so on and so forth. If there's really a credible, disruptive, innovative trend or theme that's playing out there, odds are that we have a player, we have a product that plays into it. And we also have a very high bar for purity across all of our products. Many of these themes require companies to be included to derive at least 50% of their revenues from that specific theme as well. So what you get is very narrow, dedicated exposure through these products. Moving along here, quick overview of our team. As you can see, a pretty diverse team that supports all of the research and insights that we keep putting out on a constant basis. We also have dedicated analysts that cover each of their are dedicated in covering each of their individual lanes. We have a healthcare focused analyst. You'll be listening to Alec later in this presentation. Again, he covers EVs, infrastructure, and some of our clean energy related themes. But again, many of our peer research members and analysts are a resource. So if you have any questions as you try to navigate many of these themes and what's happening in the markets, feel free to reach out to your sales representative to get in touch with us. Before we move on to defense technology portion, I really want to spend a few minutes talking about our philosophy to thematic investing and how we think about launching new products or evaluating what themes are worth pursuing broadly. So at a high level, thematic investing is really this practice of saying, what macro trends or themes or ideas or changes on the horizon are really inevitable, right? And really capturing those strongest changes and then positioning yourself to get the benefit of those themes as they play themselves out. We basically think that themes are put forth or enabled by really conclusive innovation across three main factors. Number one, you have disruptive technology, right? And here you think about all the software and hardware innovation that you have seen come out over the past several decades that have enabled new business models, that have enabled new ways for consumers to engage with the broader world. Secondly is people and demographics, especially with younger generation of consumers, how they interact with businesses, how they buy products and services, how they participate in the economy really ends up creating unique opportunities for businesses to serve. And lastly, infrastructure and physical environment, right? Everything from our roads to highways to pipelines to networks to how we manage our minerals and critical resources, opens up exciting opportunities for investors to capitalize on. Again, so at a high level, thematic investing really focuses on identifying really strong trends. You take that top-down approach to identify what is the strongest trend that's out there, and then you follow up with a bottom-up approach in terms of the best list of companies that can give you pure exposure to that particular theme. And by definition, thematic investing tends to be long-term growth-oriented strategy that's really unconstrained by traditional sectoral or geographic definitions. You end up with concentrated portfolios also. And the best part about thematic investing, in my opinion, is you're dealing with ideas that are extremely relatable, right? We can see these themes, these trends playing out in our daily lives. We can see our friends buying EVs. We can see the younger generation or kids spending more and more time playing video games or socializing in a completely different way. We see the transition away from cash to cards to mobile wallets playing out right in front of us. And we think that they make great conversations again with clients and can be a very powerful tool of building relationships with especially younger generation of clients who can understand and see these themes play out right in front of them more aggressively. Really quickly, at Global X, we follow a three-step approach to understand what themes are worth pursuing or what products we should be building around a specific theme. I know primarily what we're looking for is deep conviction in an idea. So by that, I mean we're looking for a market that ideally runs in the hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars as that theme plays itself out, right? And usually themes end up disrupting legacy businesses and legacy economic incentives, or they end up creating new markets for themselves, out of scratch. And again, ideally, you need a market that would be massive, so there is enough of a profit pool for a lot of companies to eventually thrive and service that market. Secondly, what we need is, from an investability point of view, we want to understand if there are enough companies to actually build a product around a particular theme, right? Ideally, from an ETF standpoint, we're looking at least 25 companies that are, again, public, accessible for us to be able to build a product. And if you don't have that, it only means that a theme is just not ready at this point. Or if you have just too many companies, 100 plus companies, it means that the theme is in its late stages probably and doesn't make sense, and it won't deliver the growth type returns or profile that you're looking by actually investing in that theme. And lastly, in terms of time frame, this is very important, but we think that ideal themes play themselves out over decades, right? It takes a decade to create a new opportunity. It takes a decade to displace legacy industries, and that make sure that you're not caught up in a hype cycle again that could vanish 6 months or 18 months down the line as well. So that's an important consideration as well. And again, thematic investing is really forward-looking investing approach. And I think it's very important to understand the difference or the nuance between cyclical themes and structural shifts, right? Cyclical themes, as you can see here in this exhibit, typically tend to converge back to the mean. And they're really a function of shifting supply-demand dynamics in the marketplace, right? Versus thematic themes, they end up creating a new market of their own as they play out. And typically tend to follow this S-shaped adoption curve. And the best way to play thematic, gain thematic exposure or invest in themes is to really not move in and out of these ideas, but really to build conviction and then stay long for as long as possible. Lastly, this chart here shows really nicely how themes go through their life cycles as they grow and sort of build and deliver on that profit pool that's in front of them. Mature themes, like you can see here, millennial consumers, social media, cloud computing, what you get is strong business models, predictable cash flows, but then you also have themes which represent massive potential for growth: artificial intelligence, metaverse, defense technology, again, where a lot of innovation is still playing out, and the reward in terms of the theme playing out is still further out on the horizon itself. So with that background behind us, we'll move to the meat of the content here, and I'll spend some time talking about a conviction in defense technology. But before that, let's do a quick poll. So Patrick, over to you.
Great, thanks, Tejas. We'll launch the poll here. So over the next 5 years, what areas of defense technology, according to you, are primed to receive heavy investments? And this is multiple choice. So autonomous drones, cyber defense systems, AI-based analysis and decision tools, or all of the above? We'll give everybody a few seconds to answer. All right. All right, so Tejas, it's looking like all of the above. is getting the highest results.
Absolutely. Thanks, Patrick. And like I expected, again, folks, no wrong answer with this theme, but the options that you saw represent some of the strongest areas that we believe will remain quite relevant in the coming days as investments within defense technology broadly ramp up. But again, so moving to defense technology in depth here, like I mentioned before, we're primarily looking for these macro mega trends that will reshape the global economy. And one such trend that we're seeing is defense technology. There is a strong ongoing mandate to digitize our defense systems, not only on the hardware front, but also on the software front. And again, this is presenting some unique opportunities for the traditional participants of the defense value chain, as well as a bunch of companies on the adjacent of that as well, be it companies in robotics, be it companies in Internet of Things, be it companies serving artificial intelligence and other industries as well. So let's try to understand what's happening here within defense technology. So first of all, defense itself is a category of massive economic consequence. And I think that's very important to understand. As you can see here in this exhibit, nearly 2.24 trillion was spent on military expenditures last year around the world. Over the last 2 decades, the spending on defense initiatives worldwide has almost doubled. A large majority of that growth, in fact, came between 2000 and 2010, which was primarily driven by a lot of the military action that we saw in the immediate post 9/11 world. But spending on defense was more or less flat for the better part of the most recent decade. Until the pandemic happened, and then very quickly the war in Ukraine that followed, with both of those events sort of changing the trajectory of how defense allocations were made. So at the same time, over the past 20 years, I think it is important to understand that technology and technological sort of systems that we take for granted today, right? Be it video communication or be it the availability of cloud-based tools, all of that wasn't exactly present 10 years ago, right? Or 15 years ago. And technology also went through this multifaceted evolution where we got better sensors, better processors, better algorithms, right? Better AI. And all of this innovation sort of made the case stronger for the use of technology in mission critical operations as well. Also, particularly the pandemic, I think disclosed, again, several more non-military unique challenges as well, right? Be it around securing manufacturing hubs, be it around securing supply chains, food chains, a lot of the relief and aid that is being sent around the world. And some of those challenges, again, the government began investing aggressively in making it very easy as well. Anyway, the global economy responded aggressively, and you can see in this exhibit that defense spending grew at a 5% year-over-year compound annual growth rate since 2020. The US and Europe continue to back the war that is happening in Ukraine, which is, by the way, one of the most technologically savvy wars fought recently, and that's been driving a lot of this growth. And we believe that many of those dynamics will stay consistent through this decade as well. Over the next 8 years, we expect defense spending to continue to grow at over 4% growth every year, and by 2030 to hit about 3.3 trillion as a whole. And as you can see here in this exhibit on the right-hand side, the US is the largest military spender in history, but China, India, Saudi Arabia, and many regions are also coming up fast and adding incremental spending as well, a trend that we think will only accelerate as we move towards an increasingly multipolar world. And these economies invest to sort of improve their defense abilities to become more self-sufficient. Now, moving along here and back to my original point, as we saw in the previous exhibit, the United States dominates military spending worldwide, and we expect that they will remain the heavy spenders through this decade. As you can see here, government projected outlays on defense spending are expected to scale up to $1 trillion in less than 10 years. And again, the Ukraine war was really the driver there, but the war that broke out most recently in Israel now only adds more upward pressure to this particular number also, right? But at the same time, we have several soft hostilities that, with China, with the handling of Russia that we have to sort of invest in and build around. and the risk of increasingly destabilized economy that we're seeing in the aftermath of some of these challenges. So what we're seeing here, though, is that there's really two mandates that are being fulfilled with this incremental capital that we're seeing that's coming out, right? Number one, you have your standard ammunition, your planes, your tanks, your ships, the core of the military spend, right? And that won't change much, even through this decade, just given the nature of how these contracts and how these deals are made, right? These contracts typically are projected out decades out in the future. They're well planned in advance. So we don't expect a ton of change in those areas. But there is another component here that is the modernization and adoption of technology for solutions within the broader defense value chain, right? Across the board, using more technology to control weapons, using more technology to control military ops, so on and so forth. And we see this increased spending that we're seeing really becoming a strong tailwind for digitization, broadly. And quite frankly, no nation other than the United States is in a better position to modernize its defense equipment, just given the leadership that we have in software and hardware and technology broadly, right? And the access to local companies and local talent. Just take the example of what's happening with AI chips right now. The government needs them clearly to deploy a lot of models to improve AI systems in military use cases, but only a handful of US companies even know how to use them, right? And that means there's a very unique opportunity for companies within the defense value chain to deliver more solutions around this. But anyway, we think that modernization of ammunition systems, better government procurement systems, IT systems, better OS for war operations, personnel management, so on and so forth. At the same time, cybersecurity, which is a critical component, cybersecurity software for local and regional governments, for citizen protection, as well as the use of AI in threat detection, analysis of data. All of these areas will see a lot of growth in the coming days. And again, deployment and build out of autonomous systems as well, right? Autonomous drones, submarines, robots, what have you, is going to increasingly matter. And that's where all of this increased capital is really going to go towards. The digitization of defense is finally upon us. And I think one of the best ways to gauge the increased adoption of technological solutions within defense, at least here in the United States, is to simply look at R&D allocation, right? First of all, within the United States, there has been a very notable increase in R&D over the past decade for the Department of Defense. In fact, in 2012, about 11% of total defense allocation went to research and development from the DoD. And currently in 2022, that had grown to about 15%. So about 4 points increase very clearly at the same time, while the defense budget itself has increased significantly as well. The DoD, in fact, has been quite vocal in its strategic shift towards designing more improvised technological weaponry, technological systems. In fact, for 2024, the defense budget, the DoD asked for about $145 billion to R&D, which was a 4% increase to what we had in 2023 as well. There are several pockets of this that we're excited about in terms of where the spending is going. And mind you, the DoD is extremely secretive on many of its new projects, so we have to look at secondary or tertiary data points to try and understand what's happening here. But some data points do jump out. For example, out of this R&D budget, we've seen the Department of Defense earmark about $18 billion specifically for science and technology initiatives. About $2 billion of that is going to advance AI capabilities. And just beyond these stats, I want to offer a few examples of where these investments are going also. One of the primary projects that's going on right now is the DoD working on building something called lethal autonomous weapon systems, or LAWS. Even China is working on this system. LAWS is basically a network of weapons which are designed completely ground up autonomously to identify, target, and engage adversaries with absolute limited human intervention as well. And the system uses, again, high performance computing, IoT, a lot of sophisticated big data algorithms, cloud computing, so on and so forth, to really function. There's also some interesting private and public partnerships that are playing out across the board. One notable partnership that I want to call out is what we're seeing with Palantir and the US Army Research Lab. Palantir has played a very pivotal role in supplying software for integrations, management, and deploying of data and AI models, especially in combat and command systems for special operators and armed services. So Palantir actually in July 2022 won a contract for about $100 million to implement its data and AI, specific data and AI ML capabilities across the combatant commands. And then in September 2022, in a couple of months, the ARL again extended its collaboration with Palantir. And this time they came back with a contract that was renewed for about $230 million over 1 year. So the point I'm trying to make here is that these projects didn't exist in many cases 24 months ago, or these projects didn't exist in the pre-COVID world, and they were a very tough sell back in the day. And now, because of the continuous digitization and modernization, we're seeing these proof of concepts being adopted more rapidly, and we're seeing these proof of concepts being turned into production level solutions and software that is actually going out on the battlefield as well. At the same time, again, another project that is widely being followed is the US government is collaborating with General Dynamics to replace the US government's US Army's Bradley fighting vehicle, which is going to be a $45 billion massive project, and is going to be designed to make these systems really capable in terms of technological systems. At the same time, there is about $80 billion that are spent annually on information technology for all of global defense operations, not just the U.S. government but around the world, and that number is expected to jump to about $140 billion by 2030. So clearly, the takeaway here is that these projects are not operating in silos. This is not just one project. There are several buckets and several pockets that really benefit, or this comprehensive push towards modernization really benefits the entire supply chain of equipment that goes into here, right? The supply of adjacent software, of hardware, sensing equipment, advanced components, AI chips, networking, variable components, as well as the integration of software, so on and so forth. But I also want to emphasize the importance of cybersecurity on this slide, which again is a major concern for governments, especially as the government protects its own assets from cyber attacks, but also protects citizens from cyber attacks, right? And we've seen a clear jump in spending on the back of some terrible attacks that the US government has had to deal with more recently. For example, right, the SolarWinds attack infiltrated the entire US government IT infrastructure. The Colonial Pipeline attack threatened to cut off gas supply to the entire East Coast. So US government has come out with series of investments to actually buy and upgrade cybersecurity software. In fact, government budgetary provisions for cyber went up 11% in 2021, another 10% in 2022. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act added a couple billion to cybersecurity funding. The DoD requested about $14 billion in its 2024 defense outlays for cybersecurity-related applications. The Biden administration more recently okayed another $12 billion for zero trust implementation across all of government infrastructure as well. So it's clearly becoming an area of spending alongside modernization of weapons and weapon-based systems as well. Another major area of innovation in terms of capability that we're seeing is the increased use of autonomy in the battlefield, right? And in this particular slide, we look at a company called AeroVironment. AeroVironment, based in Simi Valley, California and Virginia, is actually a major supplier, one of the top suppliers of autonomous drones to the US and other global militaries, as well as they also supply drones to some non-defense related use cases for large enterprises, so on and so forth. But this company is one of the pure players within this space. We follow them quite aggressively just to get a sense for how further out on the curve we are in terms of the use of autonomous systems in the battlefield. The company has about 1,000 employees, $500 million or so in revenues, but the business has really been benefiting from a range of tailwinds, right? Again, the continued evolution of drone platforms, the technology, the artificial intelligence, the robotic systems, the components needed to make these drones possible that are autonomous have been improving quite significantly as well. And also, this company has been supplying drones for a long time, and their drones have moved from complete manual operation to significant levels of autonomy, as you can see here in this exhibit that I have. And they continue to improve at that level as well. They've also played a huge role in helping the Ukrainian sort of defense more lately, and the company has benefited from that playing out as well. But as you can see here, AeroVironment operates across three major segments of business. First, they have unmanned systems, which is primarily drones that work alongside a combat team that's on the ground. They also make unmanned ground vehicles. In fact, some of these vehicles, for example, a Telemex Evo model that AeroVironment launched recently has a robotic arm and a gripper and is capable of picking up almost 175 pounds in weight. They're usually employed in demanding situations where you have to deal with an explosive or you're operating in hard to reach situations. They also make loitering munition systems, which is kind of like a hybrid between a missile and a drone that's capable of monitoring the system, and then also capable of monitoring an area, and also designed to launch missiles and hit targets on its own as well. So as you can see here, the combination of precision hardware, robotics control, autonomous software to solve a range of problems, and the combination of these applied functions is really the opportunity that we're talking about here that will take shape in the coming days ahead. So with that background behind us, again, folks, this is a highly innovative and disruptive area, and we think it will continue to remain under focus through this decade. We have an interesting product here, the Global X Defense Tech ETF, goes by the ticker SHLD. Is really designed, again, to capture this comprehensive exposure, but while maintaining a tilt towards the growthier tech-focused areas within the defense universe. So what we're doing here is, the fund follows the Global X Defense Tech ETF. The strategy is really designed to include the top 50 pure play companies within the defense technology space. A large number of these companies are actually traditional defense contractors, but we also have companies that are suppliers of key components that go into this modernization cycle, right? So you have your hardware component suppliers, your LiDAR component suppliers, and then several other component and chip suppliers like that, as well as companies that supply the cybersecurity solutions that governments are increasingly using for their military operations as well. Currently, the fund has about 34 names, has a 50 basis point expense ratio. It's market cap weighted. As you can see here, it offers that global exposure. We have about 63% domestic exposure. The rest is foreign. And we follow a semi-annual rebalance and reconstitution. But if you look at some of the top holdings here, you have your classic BAE Systems, General Dynamics, many of these companies that are your traditional defense contractors, but you also have companies like Palantir that supplies the software. You have companies like Leidos that supply several of the hardware components, screening solutions, so on and so forth. And what I really like about this is that it really marries growth and defense very well, right? So you get hardcore defense exposure with this particular product, where some of these classical defense names that are expected to be steady, but you also get the upside of cybersecurity of many of these hardware solutions, software solutions lumped into one. In terms of methodology, really quickly, I want to spend 30 seconds on this, but what we're doing primarily to come up with our 50-name universe is we're looking for companies within 3 subgroups. Number one is cybersecurity companies. These are companies that are involved in the development of cyber protocols, specifically for national and government defense applications. Classic example is a company like Parsons, which makes dedicated cyber software, custom cyber software for the government. A company like Telos, which operates in vendor risk management and auditing solutions for the government. The second category is defense technology. So we're including companies like Palantir and Black Sky that make very specific solutions for one particular element of the entire defense tech value chain. And then lastly, we are also including the advanced military systems and hardware providers. So your classic defense contractors are lumped into one. So what you end up with here again is a sector agnostic, geographically unrestricted exposure that looks very different from your traditional sector-based defense and aerospace ETFs or products that are out there in the market. So quickly to summarize, folks, pivotal time for defense tech, trillions in addressable spending, and we think Shield is a great way to play this paradigm shift. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Patrick for another poll question here before Alec comes on.
All right, great. So poll question number 2. Which option describes why you are interested in learning more about U.S. infrastructure today? Recent legislation, long-standing need to improve infrastructure in the United States, shifting trends in construction spending, a combination of the listed options, or other. Give you a few seconds. All right, it looks like kind of a tie between the longstanding need to improve infrastructure in the United States and then a combination of the above three. So with that said, we'll kick it over to Alex now.
Great, and we'll touch on all those points. Certainly, those are all sort of trends supporting our conviction in the U.S. infrastructure development theme, which we cover with our U.S. infrastructure development ETF, PAVE, ticker PAVE. But without further ado here, I will be covering some of the major trends that we're seeing that could support sentiment in the short and the long term for this theme, as well as diving into the product later on in the presentation. But first and foremost here, we know that the last 2 decades has really been a departure from industrial trends we've seen in the past in the United States. Very much this globalization trend has seen the offshoring of supply chains and manufacturing and other advantageous regions. And as a result, you've really seen industrial growth in the United States begin to stagnate. But we really have reason to believe, partially because of some black swan events that I'll cover, but also because of some spending in recent legislature, that this is a trend that's likely to reverse quite soon. And to speak of this, this really began the onshoring and the bringing manufacturing back to the United States. This is a trend that really began with the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's certainly been exacerbated by, as Tejas was mentioning, the Ukraine crisis as well. But these are events that have frankly exposed lots of vulnerabilities in global supply chains and have urged U.S. companies and companies around the world to really reconsider how their supply chains are oriented. If we look on the left-hand chart there, there's a great visual of how that's played out over time. Certainly, you see this spike in mentions of these buzzwords such as reshoring and onshoring in news stories and corporate presentations. Certainly, you saw that spike in the first quarter of 2020, which corresponds with the beginning of the pandemic, and it's trended upwards ever since. Turns out this isn't just talk, because if we look on the right-hand chart here too, we see that construction spending on manufacturing in the United States has been by far the fastest growing segments for construction in this country. And you did actually see total manufacturing construction spending reach a record of $108 billion in 2022. And we believe this creates an opportunity for construction companies and infrastructure companies in the US, because we simply need these kinds of expertise to build out these large, capital-intensive manufacturing hubs. And certainly we believe that there could be a value chain ramification as well there. But certainly the bills have come in and only contributed to this onshoring trend, specifically the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act. The Inflation Reduction Act provides many incentives to bring manufacturing for renewable energy and electric vehicles and battery tech to the United States. And then similarly, the CHIPS Act provides these incentives for semiconductor manufacturing. So very much this has been these bills, and in the next section, I'll dive into the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is really the crown jewel of federal investments in infrastructure recently. But we have seen companies in the space, and on the left-hand side, that's specifically constituents within our infrastructure product. They've been highlighting these bills as potential sources of tailwind since their passage. And it's easy to see why. And again, on the right-hand side, the construction spending on manufacturing, clearly there is a corresponding uptick in that spending that relates to the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the CHIPS Act in August 2022. Both of those bills were passed. And since passage of both those bills, you have seen actually $470 billion in private investments flow into the United States for manufacturing of those categories I mentioned. the electric vehicles, the renewable energy, the semiconductors as well. So not only is this exciting for companies in regards to the federal spend, but also there is a private spending magnifier at play here as well. So, that's really the first trend we've been looking at is reshoring and how that's affecting these companies. The next element, and certainly been top of mind and timely, is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, often just referred to as the infrastructure bill. But before talking about that, I think it's worth mentioning why we're in this circumstance where an Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act was needed. And there's a couple of reasons here. One, the United States, sort of an inverse relationship to defense spending, has actually spent a very small portion of their GDP on public construction relative to history. And that certainly has, relegated certain projects to not being top priorities, has not allowed as many new projects or progress on pre-existing projects. So certainly this has created a challenge as well. And then another element here is that this is a matter of course. A lot of these infrastructure assets, locks, chambers, dams, bridges, roads, tunnels, many of them are certified for about 50 years of useful life. So, to some extent, this is just the progression of these assets aging to the extent that they're not as usable as they used to, and they're deteriorating. And then beyond that, and certainly exasperating that issue of useful lifespan, we also have population growth. Compared to the 60s, we have about 100 million more people. And it's not just that there's more people using infrastructure assets in aggregate, but they're also disproportionately shifting towards urban areas. You can see here on this chart that a much larger portion of populations are now in urban areas. So this places disproportionate stress on our infrastructure assets in cities as well. So this is certainly contributing to those issues. So for all those reasons and more, that's sort of why we're seeing infrastructure in this country be at the state that it is. But before I continue there, I'm just curious, we're going to hand it back to Patrick for another poll cut question that's specifically on the state of infrastructure.
All right. So on a scale from 1 to 10, with 10 representing the highest level of approval, how would you rate your satisfaction with local infrastructure assets such as roads, bridges, public transportation, airports, etc.? Give you a few seconds. All right. So Alec, it looks like, the 5, 6, 7 kind of mid-range is the winner.
Gotcha. And unfortunately, I can't see those results right now, but oh, there we go. Perfect. Yeah, and honestly, that's spot on with our next slide here. Yeah, certainly tough crowd here for your local infrastructure assets, but it makes sense. And certainly the American Society of Civil Engineers, which is, a body that monitors the condition of infrastructure in the United States, they would agree. They gave in their last major report card that takes place every roughly 4 years, they gave U.S. infrastructure a C- grade. So certainly, relates to that average of 7 or 6. But this is a packed slide, but there's lots of representations of how poor infrastructure assets can be in the country. Some that I like to highlight here: 43% of roads are in poor or mediocre condition. 70% of transmission lines are at least 25 years old. I'll circle back to that. I have a slide on the grid later on in the presentation. Certainly on the water utility side too, we're in a circumstance where millions of Americans still receive water from lead piping, and billions of gallons of water are lost due to a leaky distribution and just suboptimal distribution system. So across the boards, roads, bridges, your traditional transportation assets, the utility side, water utilities, electrical utilities, public transportation. There are a lot of challenges, in terms of maintaining our infrastructure moving forward. But in our view, this also creates opportunities for companies in the space. And fortunately, we have seen attention very much return, federal attention, that is, to this space with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act in November 2021. And this is, in our view, a generational investment. $1.2 trillion package that directs around $550 billion in new spending across, as you can see here, a wide array of different infrastructure spending areas. Certainly your traditional physical assets, your roads, bridges, highways, that's the largest allocation of the fund at around $110 billion. Passenger freight rail, public transit, airports, ports, waterways, all receive tens of billions of dollars in investments as well. And we're also very excited about sort of your non-traditional infrastructure assets, the next generation, power infrastructure, grid improvement, EV charging, renewable energies, broadband, digital infrastructure, clean water, etc. These are all, spending areas that haven't received a lot of attention in recent times, and certainly there's still these large projects that need the expertise of a construction or an infrastructure company to actually get off the ground as well. So again, this is certainly a bill that companies in the space have been drawing attention to, and it has very much galvanized investor sentiment into the space as well over the last several years. And for some context here on timelines, I think it is important to realize that this is a long-term investment in infrastructure. It's likely to unfold over a matter of decades, not just a couple of years. And for context, really the last major package that we had in this country on infrastructure was a portion of the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act in 2009, which directed just under $50 billion towards the Department of Transportation, meant as a short-term stimulus, meant to really, jumpstart construction demand. And even though this was designed to reboot the economy and as a short-term stimulus, you still were seeing this bill, much of it, that allocation towards construction, be spent all the way until 2019 or 2019, excuse me. So even a short-term construction stimulus takes time. So how that translates into how the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is likely to play out, you're likely to see around 50% of the bill get dispersed at the state government level by 2026. And by the end of the decade, you're not going to see all of the bill dispersed yet. And it's going to take even longer for it to actually reach the project level. So there's quite a time frame that's associated with how this funding is dispersed. Some of this is logistically on the federal level. How do we get the mechanisms in place to distribute this funding? And then some of that is construction timelines. But with all that being said, we are already seeing a major progress on this bill. And actually, since we just got updated numbers here, since passage of that bill, $280 billion from the infrastructure bill is now available at the state level. That's being directed towards 38,000 related projects. Now, I also don't want to mislead by what that figure means. It's not necessarily 38,000 shovel-ready projects. I'm based in Manhattan. We're not seeing, roads and bridges and tunnels materialize out of thin air. But in many cases, these are projects in their planning stages, and they have many steps left before they actually reach the construction stage. However, we do think that this is a very good indication of where that federally funded construction project will take place at some point in the future. And the best news for companies in the space, that 38,000, that 280 billion is a small subset of what is to come as the bill continues to move. And we have seen, the guidance has been clear. A lot of these companies have been pointing towards the end of this year and the beginning of 2024 for actually when the benefits from these bills are likely to begin in earnest. But we have already seen some contract wins for these companies. In many cases, it's pre-existing projects. It's projects that has funding distributed by pre-existing federal programs as well. So you have seen some holdings within PAVE, like Jacobs Solutions and AECOM, construction engineering firms, which are really the first line that could, reap benefits from the bill. You are seeing them win contracts here. But again, the guidance has really been the maximum benefits from the bill are likely to take place towards more of the middle of the decade, 2025, 2026, 2027, but we are already seeing progress on projects. And very briefly here too, I'll highlight, one project in particular, the Hudson River Tunnel, which transports hundreds of thousands of commuters between New Jersey and New York every day. Really, it's more than a century old. It sustained heavy damages from hurricanes, and it's been in desperate need of repair for quite some time now. And local officials tried to do something about that in 2009, but for budgeting reasons and frankly for political reasons, it wasn't able to move forward until 2000 or 2021 with the passage of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which distributes around $7 billion in funding, which is a record for mass transit projects. And that has allowed that project to move forward so that it's likely to begin construction next year. Now, the bill is not doling out $7 billion left and right, but we do think that this is a example that's emblematic of a story that's unfolding around the country, where there have been these long-needed upgrades and improvements that simply were not able to move forward before the bill. And then briefly here, we talked about manufacturing, we talked about the infrastructure bill. Briefly here, another element worth noting is climate change. And we know that the externalities associated with climate change, flooding, extreme heat, extreme cold, natural disasters, they're trending upwards in their intensity and their frequency. And this really has a physical impact on infrastructure. It increases wear and tear. It really cuts down on that useful life I mentioned earlier. And from that standpoint, there is a direct demand need for a lot of these infrastructure companies that could ultimately be called upon to renovate and retrofit and repair, frankly, and just improve. So that's one side of the equation when it comes to climate change. And the other is the grid improvements. The fact that even before this energy transition and electrification of vehicles and mobility that's taking place, the grid has been in a heavy need of an upgrade. And it's estimated that by 2035, we're going to need to increase the mileage of transmission lines in the country by about 60% to accommodate our shift to renewable energy and clean electricity. And there's a huge gap right now. You see that small sliver of orange there. The left-hand block is the current mileage, the right-hand white and black block, that's sort of the estimated need. And that small sliver of orange, it's what's in the pipeline right now. So there is this very substantial gap that whether it's a construction engineering firm that has expertise in building out transmission, whether it's sort of the supply chain ramifications, you'll need more wiring and equipment and so on and so forth. We do believe that this grid renovation aspect could also increase demand for infrastructure development in this country. But that's really the content there on infrastructure. Very briefly here before we jump to a quick Q&A, we do want to highlight here PAVE, ticker PAVE, which is our U.S. Infrastructure Development ETF. You'll notice, something that's a very deliberate design philosophy for PAVE versus other infrastructure funds is this emphasis on industrials and materials. You can see there that industrials is close to 3/4 of the fund, and the materials is another north of 20% there. And most other infrastructure funds are more traditional infrastructure, utilities based. And we think this is more of an income play. This is more about maintaining pre-existing infrastructure. Whereas the utilities, or excuse me, the industrials and the materials, this is more of the building blocks and the companies that are actually coming in and called upon to build out new infrastructure assets. So very deliberate design philosophy choice there. We think that this constitutes more of the higher growth portion of the U.S. infrastructure space. And then what that looks like in terms of methodology, there's 4 main categories. First of all, the fund to be eligible for inclusion, a security must derive at least 50% or more revenue from the United States. So you want to give that, that purity to the United States. And then we also seek to provide as much revenue exposure as possible to these 4 categories here. Construction engineering services, the Jacob Solutions, the AECOMs, the Tutor Perinis of the world, ultimately the companies that are called upon to design and build and maintain these construction projects, raw materials and composites, anything from cement, steel, aggregates, asphalt, etc., that are the building blocks. You also certainly need a bucket for products and equipment, anything from heavy-duty machinery, cranes, to picks and shovels that we ultimately also need for these construction projects. And then lastly, the 4th bucket there, industrial transportation. Namely, this is heavy rail. And in most cases, this is the most efficient, and in some cases, the only way to actually move these large quantities of materials and equipment from point A to point B. The portfolio right now, as of the end of Q3, it's about 43% products and equipment, about 32% raw materials and composites, about 13% construction engineering, and about 12% industrial transportation. I do want to be conscious of our time. We have just a few minutes left here, but I'll hand it back over to Patrick and we can answer a few Q&A questions.
Thanks, Alec. Yes, let's see. The first one that came in, can you elaborate on the role of artificial intelligence in building defense systems? And where are we in this cycle? And what are some trends you're seeing there?
Absolutely. Thanks, Patrick, and I can take that. So, we look at AI as a foundational technology, and it's clearly of tremendous use within the defense vertical, itself. I think what we need is better AI systems over time, and they can limit again a lot of personnel cost, limit wastage, help in cyber defenses, support with better planning, scenario analysis, things like that. But clearly it won't come overnight. We have this massive innovation unlock with generative AI, and that makes artificial intelligence applications a lot more capable. But one of the things that AI needs, for example, is lots and lots of data. And only recently has the government really started to modernize. So they're only recently, capturing data points across the field, across all of their sensing equipment, across all of their hardware, which again parallelly is getting modernized to capture, respond that data back, to major data centers, so on and so forth. So over the long term, I see a lot of opportunity in terms of crafting response plans, automating a lot of the defense operations, but it won't come overnight. I think it's a decade-long pursuit. And we also think that AI has a very strong role to play on the cybersecurity front, and that may be more tangible in terms of the timelines there, because cybersecurity solutions, especially using AI, just understanding volumes and volumes of data, they're ready for deployment right now. And I think the government will will try to invest in that space more aggressively in the coming days. Again, Shield does a great job of capturing some of these cyber names. We also have another cybersecurity ETF by the ticker BUG, BUG, which is also very well positioned as this opportunity comes about.
All right, great. And I think we got just a quick few seconds for one more. And you just brought up Shield, so this one came in. How is Shield different from a traditional defense sector ETF?
Absolutely. Again, great question. So, like I mentioned during the presentation also, Shield is designed to capture disruptive technology or some of these modernization efforts within the broader defense space. So we're looking for those 3 subsegments, the advanced military systems, defense technology, and cybersecurity. If you look at some of the traditional defense sector-based ETFs, you don't get that cybersecurity exposure. The 50% revenue screen that we have also makes sure that you have very high purity in each of those subsegments for companies that you pick up. Some of the typical defense and aerospace ETFs typically don't do that. But also another key point is traditional defense and aerospace ETFs also lump in aerospace companies in it. So you end up getting exposure to a lot of companies that supply the commercial aviation business, and we don't have those names in Shield. So a lot more targeted niche exposure to the opportunity versus some of the traditional sector-based ETFs.
All right, great. Thanks, Tejas. So I think we're about at that time. So thank you both, Tejas and Alec. That was great, and thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you. Thanks, Patrick.
Take care.